Okay, let's take a look at everything. Are we ready to go? I feel like I'm ready to go. Kinda, sorta. Not as prepared as I probably should be, but everything looks good for now. Alright, so trying a couple of different things this time. I've changed the way I'm doing my background music, so the plus side is it seems to be working. The downside is I can't actually hear it, so if it's a little bit too loud or too quiet, y'all will have to kind of let me know in the chat. But I have levels here that I can see, and the levels look to be pretty good. I got it right now set down at about a minus 12 decibels, which is what the industry standard says is about proper, but I don't actually know. I'm not on the other end. I can't hear it. Either way, though. We got that done, and I think we're ready to get started. Yes, so I'm going to make this go away. And we're going to get started. So, hello! Shadowcat back after having a couple of weeks off, and we're finally getting back into the lectures. I know, my bad. Shouldn't have done it, but I had a really complicated lecture that I wanted to do, and it's still not ready yet. This is a double-edged sword, because I know that it needs to be perfect when I do it, and unfortunately, the longer I put it off, the more perfecter it has to be. Which means that I am chasing an ever-rising standard of perfection that I can never reach, and the longer it goes, the more unattainable it gets, and the more unrelentingly terrifying it becomes. So, yeah, I might get around to that someday. We'll see. For today, however, I want to kind of cover something that I've heard in the news over the last week, and something that is coming in our lifetimes. And that is, humanity is coming up to an existential evolutionary crisis. Something that we are going to have to deal with. We're not going to have a choice on this one. This is going to be an evolutionary crisis on par with the Neanderthal and the Homo sapien. And whether we survive or not is going to depend on how well we adapt. And the reason why I put this picture up here... Is my mouse showing up? I don't think my mouse is showing up either way. I bet if I did this, it might. Does it show up now? No, it does not. Anyway, the reason for the picture on there, which is apparently attributed to Eleanor Roosevelt, but I can't actually confirm that. I'm just going to kind of take that one as gospel for the time being, is because I like to, on this channel, discuss larger philosophical concepts and topics. It's kind of the whole reason I started doing these lectures as direct messages to begin with, and now as a live lecture. But today we're going to start off by talking about people. Then we're going to move into the events that those people are talking about, and then I want to get into the larger ideas behind them. And I see that JP is in the chat already. Hello, JP. Good to see you here. Alright, and before we get started, I'm going to try doing something new that every single other YouTuber does when they're doing this. So before we even get started, if you haven't hit the like button, please hit the like button. I hit the like button. So it's all good. And then if you know somebody else who you think might be into this kind of thing, then share this video with them now so they can come and join us for this this whole discussion. Why not? And that's as much chilling as I'm going to do for myself. I'm a pretty firm believer that if it's good enough, people will come to it. If you build it, they will come. If you have to promote it and advertise it, it might not have been that good enough to begin with. But then again, I'm also not a marketing major. I don't have an MBA, and so I could be wrong about all of that. Anyway, though, let's go ahead and get into this. So there's two things that I primarily want to talk about today. And the two things that I want to talk about today is artificial intelligence, AI, which has been a big topic of discussion in a lot of circles lately, and immortality. And the reason that I want to talk about both of these is because two reasons. number one, multiple futurists have said that both artificial intelligence, that is to say, an AGI, an artificial general intelligence, or a creatively thinking, cognizant artificial system, and immortality, which is to say, the human removal of death from our lifespan, are both going to happen within the current generation. Now, whether that is Gen Alpha, whether that is... What are we on now? I've heard some people say Gen Z, but I think that Gen Z is a little bit earlier. Whatever the current generation is right now. They're saying that we are going to see both of these things in the next generation. And this is a good thing. I'm not going to be one of these people that's going to come out and doomsay and say, no, it's going to be the end of everything. No, these are all good things. These are all things that we need as a species to do. I do not believe that this is going to be bad for humanity any more than fire was, or any more than the discovery of electricity was, or the microprocessor. Because at the end of the day, these things are going to be just tools. And tools can be used to create and destroy. I mean, when we made a hammer, we found out that we could pound a peg into a rock. We also found out that we could beat somebody's skull in with it. Actually, that might have happened in reverse. We might have learned to beat people's skulls in first and then pound a peg into a rock. I mean, electricity, it gave us the telegraph, it gave us light, it gave us heat. It also gave us the electric chair. Tools are just that. They are just tools, and artificial intelligence is much the same way. So will immortality be when we get to that point. But I think that we should go ahead and just get into kind of the nitty-gritty about this without wasting too much more time. And so I want to bring up a news article that we saw earlier this week. That is, Elon Musk warns of a civilizational risk posed by AI in a meeting with tech CEOs and senators. So this was a meeting at, I guess it's Congress or something like that. And it had Elon Musk, it had Mark Zuckerberg, it had Sam Altman, along with others who met with senators Wednesday in a behind-closed-door forum. So if we read this, let me go ahead and make this a little bit bigger so I can read this. And I promise I'm not going to turn this channel into one of those just, hey, we're going to sit down and read the news things. I have a higher point to this. So, tech billionaire Elon Musk warned senators in a private gathering on Capitol Hill that artificial intelligence posed a civilizational risk to governments and societies, according to a senator in the room. Let's see. As he left, he called the meeting historical. Yes, yes, yes. Here, now let's get into the actual quotes. The consequences of AI going wrong are severe, so we have to be proactive rather than reactive, Musk told a gaggle of reporters before he ducked into his waiting Tesla that presumably drove itself there and then drove itself away. The question is really one of a civilizational risk. It's not like one group of humans versus another. It's like, hey, this is something that is potentially risky for all humans everywhere. When asked whether AI will destroy mankind, Musk paused and replied, there is some chance that it is above zero that AI will kill us all. I think it's low. But if there is some chance, I think there should also be, or we should also consider the frailty of human civilization. And so that's all we really need to know. So you had everything there to everything from there to some sort of high-level comment about civilization with AI, which is a very 60,000-foot level remark. It was everything in between, so surprisingly interesting and helpful. Either way. Doesn't really matter, that was all we really wanted to look at. And the thing is that what they're talking about is basically the Skynet scenario. Okay? Is there a possibility that we develop an AI, the AI goes rogue and decides that the Earth and the AI and possibly the AI's progeny, would be better off if there were simply no more humans. Okay? This has been the subject of science fiction ever since science fiction was. We can go all the way back to Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, where a single mad doctor cobbles together corpses, and then with a bolt of lightning brings it to life. It is the greatest scientific marvel of humanity. Only for then Frankenstein's monster to proceed to start killing people. It was one of the first instances of we have pushed the boundaries of science, and now we reap the rewards of it. Since then, there have been many scenarios, and not all of them, but many of them end in some kind of cataclysmic way. We develop high-power weapons, and then we destroy each other with them. We develop nanobots, and we end up in some kind of gray goo scenario where they get out, and then there's nothing else that we can do. And this is all very distracting. Go away. There we go. So, like I said, gray goo just eats everything. It's replicating nanobots that consume, replicate until there's literally nothing left. The entire concept of a gray goo scenario is that by the time it's done, there is nothing left of the Earth except for the molten core and mantle, a thin barrier of presumably something like granite to keep it contained, and then a ball of just nanites. So there's that scenario. And then, of course, we get to things like AI, where we have investigated this with AIs such as like the HAL 9000 from 2001, Skynet from Terminator, these things. And so there is concern, but as they pointed out, it's a very minuscule one, actually. There is actually something that is going to be much more important, much more dangerous, and much more likely. And it is something that we are going to have to deal with not in 100 years, maybe not even in 50 years. We're talking about a problem with AI that we're going to have to start dealing with within maybe the next 10, and possibly less. So it's no secret that AI has been taking over in many different circumstances. As a matter of fact, although most people have forgotten it by now, I do believe it is Bill Maher, I forget how it's pronounced. Reportedly, he went back to work this week, and Bill Maher is a late night talking head. He went back to work. Now, why is this significant? Why was he out of work to begin with? Well, he was out of work because of the writer's strike in Hollywood. And the writer's strike is going on for a multitude of reasons, most of which are bad reasons. But one of them that is actually understandable is the writers are striking over the use of artificial intelligence, rudimentary as it is, in the writer's room. That is to say, you can go to a program like ChatGPT, give it a series of parameters, and have it simply generate for you a movie script. More advanced AIs can do more than that. They can even create your characters with complete descriptions and even suggest what actors might be best for playing them, either based on their appearance, based on their skills, based on their credentials. There are many parts of the filmmaking industry that could be, rather easily, replaced by a sufficiently advanced AI, and it does not even necessarily have to be an AGI. It doesn't have to be self-aware to do these things, it just needs to be good enough. And right now, the AI is almost good enough. Actually, there's a, now that I think about it, there is a great example. I wonder if I can pull it up real quickly. Let me see if I can find this. This would have been... This was an AI thing that was put out a while ago. And I'm going to move this over here like this. Somebody used AI to do this. Let's take a look.
In a galaxy far...
Oh, hold on. I'm on the wrong speakers. Let me try this. Haha, that should be better now. So, this was cut together entirely by one person, I believe, with an AI. They were using, I think, Midjourney and ChatGPT and a few other things to build this. And it's hilarious, but it is important, and I'll explain why in just a minute.
In a galaxy far, far away, prepare for a reboot like never before. This summer, Wes Anderson brings you a side of the Star Wars universe you've never seen before, the Galactic Menagerie. Join this ragtag crew of unlikely heroes as they navigate the absurdity of the cosmos, challenge the Empire, and redefine what it means to be a rebel.
Our mission is simple. We steal the Emperor's artifact, save the galaxy, and maybe find ourselves along the way.
For this mission, we'll need lightsaber, blaster, thermal detonator, paper airplanes, spare parts, and R2-D2.
With a star-studded ensemble featuring the galaxy's most eccentric cast, the Galactic Menagerie is the most delightfully offbeat Star Wars adventure yet. Starring Timothée Chalamet, Scarlett Johansson, Edward Norton, Bill Murray, Jeff Goldblum, William Dafoe, Adrian Brody, and Owen Wilson.
Wow.
Coming to theaters this summer, may the Force be with you.
And so when we take a look at something like that, which, you know, funny as it is, cute as it is, how many jobs did that just replace? I mean, we have one person who just went through, and with the use of AI, they have a script written, they have set pieces put together, they have casting suggestions, and all you really have to do then is, you know, host interviews, host rehearsals, things like that, and just see who's going to fit into the right position. And you have just wiped out maybe 100 jobs in one Hollywood studio just with the use of AI. And so this gets over to what you just saw a flash of. I did some quick searching to see how automation was going to change different industries in the world. And I found this. It says ranking industries by their potential for AI automation. Now, something that I want to be very, very specific about. This says AI automation. And that is largely the subject of what I'm talking about today. But there is something else that I want to get into. And that is not just AI automation, but AI and robot innovation. After all, I'm sure we've all seen pictures of, say, a car factory. Let me see if I can find some pictures of that. Car factory. Can I find some images? Yeah, here we go. Here's some images. So here's a car factory, and as you can see, we've got machines and machines, and ooh, here's an entire assembly line of nothing but machines. This is not new. We have been doing this for 20 years now, 25 years. I'm not exactly how far back the roboticization, I'm not exactly sure how you pronounce that word, but how far back this goes. Now, we do still have some people who do work on auto factory floors, but all the heavy lifting is done by machine now. I would say probably 75% of all the welding is done by machine now. Installation of large parts, especially large uniform parts, is all done by machine now. This is something that has already happened, and it's not just in the auto industry. Any manufacturing like this has already been heavily influenced by the use of robotics. This is important because now we're talking about artificial intelligence. Not just these same repetitive tasks, but also the capability to think about these things. And so when I looked at this, U.S. industries with the highest potential for automation. And this is not necessarily broken down by a certain field, like, say, automotive or service is on there, but like grocery service or retail service, things like that. It's much broader, and it covers all places. So when we look at this, we have office administrative support, we have legal, architectural and engineering, life, physical and social sciences, business and financial operations, community social services, management, sales, computer and mathematical, farming, fishing, forestry, protective services, and it goes all the way down. Now, when we take a look at some of these, and we look at the future prospects of them, office and administrative support. So it says here, many common tasks in these roles, such as scheduling meetings, writing reports, and data input, are likely to be fully automated in the future, and we are looking at upwards of 46% of that industry. That is to say, anybody you know who works a secretarial job, okay? Anybody who answers a phone, anybody who does data entry, anybody who works on a computer, essentially, that does not require some kind of either license or degree, is looking to have their job gone at some point within, what are they saying here? What's the timetable they're looking at here? I don't know. I think it's just looking at in general. No, I don't think it actually says. All right, regardless, whether it's in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, this is going to happen because all of these things that can be automated will be automated. Much like the robots did in the auto industry, any job that can be replaced by an AI will be replaced by an AI. You don't need to have a call center of people if you can have one supercomputer that can handle 50,000 phone calls at once. And we've already seen evidence of this. I mean, any one of us in the first world who has a phone is likely familiar with robocallers. We're talking about any kind of telemarketing, or maybe bill collectors, or let's say promotions, like say political advertisements, things like that. We've all been called by a computer before. And more than likely, most of us who have a phone in the first world, we've had to call into like tech support, or we have to call in because there's a problem with a service or something. What's the first thing that you get when you call in? You get met with an automated response and a menu. And the menu will tell you something similar to, "Thank you for calling, whatever this is. Please listen carefully as our options have changed." We've all heard that before. But now we're seeing more and more places that are switching to an AI-based model that is not only capable of giving you all these options, but is also capable of interpreting your answers. Good examples of this will be things like the airline industry, who have fully fledged AIs that can actually talk to you and try to resolve your issue before you actually talk to any real person. Now, sometimes this works, usually it doesn't. But the fact that it is already there now speaks to where it is going to be in the future in just a few short years. So we're looking at office and administrative support. So as I said, almost any desk job is likely to be removed and replaced by an AI. Up to 46% of them. So just to make this easier for you to picture, look at all of those big skyscrapers in big cities, whether it's New York, whether it's Chicago, whether it's Dallas or Miami, anything like that. All those big skyscrapers, almost all of those skyscrapers our office space, to some degree or another. Now, picture that skyscraper half empty. Half of that building is now unemployed. We go to the next one down, legal. This is not to say that AI is going to replace things like lawyers or judges. It's not. Hopefully. In fact, it actually might in the future, and that will be a terrifying prospect, but I'm hoping here that that's not the case. No, what I am talking about, though, are paralegals, and clerks, and legal researchers. All of those tasks can be simply automated by an AI with access to a copy of Westlaw or given access to one of your legal firm's computer systems, where you could simply dictate to it and have it transcribe everything that you say. Or you could scan in a whole bunch of information. We already have the technology for which a computer can scan a sheet of paper and transcribe the image to text. And at that point, you could simply ask it to generate for you a case report, given all the legal documents you have, and it's done for you. What would have taken a paralegal perhaps an afternoon or maybe a couple of days to do, the AI can have done for you in a few minutes, maybe a few hours at most. Architecture and engineering. Again, we're dropping here in the number of people that would be replaced, but when it comes to architecture and engineering, the biggest thing about this is the math. You need an engineer needs to understand material sciences because they need to understand what the strengths and tolerances are for materials. They need to know mathematics for design. They need to be able to measure out the distances for, the structures of buildings. They need to be able to plan all of this stuff out. An AI would be able to simply take a drawing that an engineer has done and within minutes or hours be able to figure out from a simple drawing the exact measurements that every single aspect of the drawing needs to be and the materials it needs to be built out of to meet tolerances. What would have previously taken perhaps a team of engineers to do over the course of a week to a month, an AI can simply do in a few hours with the help of one engineer. Or at this part, you wouldn't even really need the engineering. One architect. The same thing is true for all of these. Anything that can be automated will be automated. And we look down here at this blue line. We are talking about all industries averaged. See, down here at the bottom, we see building, grounds, cleaning, and maintenance. AIs cannot really clean things. I mean, they just can't. They don't have fingers. The same thing is true with installation, maintenance, and repairs. Again, AIs don't have fingers. They can't fix things. However, do you know what can? Robots. Robots can fix things. See, we have industries that are already filled with robots. I use the auto industry as an example because it was a really good example. However, those robots have to be meticulously programmed to do one specific task at a time. But what if we had one of those robots and we made it mobile? Then we give it the ability to see its surroundings, much like an automated car does. What if we then gave it an artificial intelligence to control it? Something that could see its environment, understand its environment, and then interact with its environment. Suddenly, you could have one of these robots, except instead of giving it a welding stick, you could give it a mop, and you could tell it to clean, an entire area. We already have Roombas, and Roombas are dumb as hell. Imagine giving an AI, an AI to a Roomba. Not only would it still be able to do the job, but it might be able to do so much more. So as it is, with AI alone, we are looking at a rough average of 25% of all industries in the United States that could simply be gone. And to put this into context, the current population of the United States is about 325 million. So I'm going to pull up my calculator. 325, 000 is 1,000, 000 is million, divided by 4. Any guesses? I'm just kidding. I'm not going to make you guess. The answer to that is 81,250,000. Just by this chart alone, we are talking about 81,250,000 people now unemployed. Now, why is this significant besides the obvious? I need a drink real quick before I get into that. Ah, much better. I was parched. Okay, oh, and JP says, needs to work on things like renewable resources, mass education, and healthcare research. Okay. If a supercomputer can figure out replicators and renewable energy, then we can work towards a more utopian existence. We're gonna get to that. Like, you're thinking ahead, okay? We're gonna get to that. But we're not there yet. Okay. Now, as I said, 81.25 million people unemployed. What do we do with them? Well, we have dealt with this kind of thing in the past. See, before we had robots, we just had machines. And mechanization has been a big part of human history. After all, before we even had the Industrial Revolution, we had machines. We had things like the tractor. We had things like the cotton gin. We had many machines that were built to do a job better, faster, and longer than any man could. I think the cotton gin is a great example because during that time in history, slavery was not just legal, but it was widespread, at least in the US. And it was widespread because in order to support the cotton industry, we needed a large workforce. I mean, larger than we could realistically have provided in the United States without slavery. They just decided that slavery was going to be the answer. And so they imported slaves en masse to put to work in cotton fields. I mean, there were other things too. There was tobacco and stuff. But we didn't get a tobacco gin. We got a cotton gin, so tobacco doesn't work. And so picking cotton is the worst. Like, I never really understood picking cotton until I was down in Texas and I actually got to see cotton. And once you have seen cotton and you have seen what it turns into, and more importantly, the spines and thorns on cotton, you begin to understand why cotton plantations were just horrific. I mean, it wasn't enough that we had massive populations of people in slavery, but the things that they had to do with their bare hands was horrific. Now you introduce the cotton gin. Something that it didn't eliminate the problem entirely, but it reduced the damage done by having to go through and pick the cotton and then, process the cotton massively, because it was able to separate the cotton from the plant. And one cotton gin could do the work of a dozen people easily. And it could do this so long as there was somebody there to run the cotton gin. If you had a dozen people who usually took to process cotton, and you could put 4 people to work on one cotton gin, you could easily outdo the productivity of that dozen people with a quarter. Get 4 cotton gins, you've now increased your productivity by 400%. It was insane. The same thing was true when and by the way, that did happen. That actually did happen. Because once the plantations realized that, wow, we can actually increase our yield by 400%, do it. The same thing was true when the automobile came out. You had entire industries that were built around horses. You had carriage manufacturers, you had saddle manufacturers, you had farriers. Okay, you had street sweepers who did nothing but clean streets up after the horses. You had all of these industries that were built around horses, and when cars started to replace horses, many people said, well, how are we supposed to survive? You've drastically cut into the demand for this, and now supply has vastly outpaced it. Well, Economics 101 is when supply outpaces demand, prices drop. And this is true to an extent until the prices drop below sustainability, at which point industry dies. And many of them did. Now, the one thing to say about both of these is that when it came to, say, the cotton gin, slaves could be taken out of the fields, trained on how to use a cotton gin, and then they could be put back to work on that. When it came to the replacement of horses by automobiles, you could take farriers and you could train them to be mechanics. I mean, after all, if you can use the tools as a farrier, you can probably learn to use wrenches and screwdrivers and everything else. You're probably familiar with half of these tools already, you're just unfamiliar with the thing you're using them on, and you can learn. And so one job could transform into another job. But we are not standing at the precipice of that today. Famously, during the last election cycle here in the US, there was a Democrat, I forget which Democrat it was, that famously, or infamously, depending on which side you happen to be on, said to the various coal miners, learn to code. The insinuation being that as we switch off of fossil fuels and we move to renewable energy sources, that many of these coal workers who have been working underground for years, decades, sometimes their entire lives, should just learn how to write code and then go to work in a programming farm. Obviously, that idea was ridiculous at its core, because the skills that they have do not transfer. However, it's also ridiculous because that's not actually an answer. It's not actually a solution, as we're going to see right now. We're not facing a problem where people are going to be able to simply retrain into a new job. It is true that some people, like say if you were working tech support, okay, like see up here, administrative support. If you were working tech support, I didn't want to click on that. Go back. There we go. Yeah, if you were working administrative support at a firm and your job was one of those that was eliminated, then perhaps you could also be retrained to work with an AI. That's possible. But not everyone is going to get retrained like that. Now, When it came to things like cars taking over the roads from horses, you did have some horse farmers who would have to find a new place to work. Perhaps they could go to work at another place, maybe on a farm, where they could do their own, or they could peddle their skills, you know, from horse husbandry to maybe cattle husbandry. Others, however, may have simply had to take whatever work they could get. And when we're talking about this, we're talking about office and administrative support jobs. So we're talking things like maybe HR, tech support, as I said before. We're talking human resources. These are the kind of jobs that will be replaced. And where do they go? Well, barring anything else, you could say, well, go flip burgers, okay? Or go run a cash register, okay? Go become a cashier. The problem is, look down here. Sales and related. Okay? Sales and related, also getting replaced. This is where you're seeing a lot of your cashiers getting replaced by kiosks. Most famously, the most famous one that I hear complained about around here is McDonald's. Because I happen to live in an area with mostly an older population. Oh god, I'm turning in one of the older population too. Anyway, one of the most common complaints that I hear about right now is the fact that people will go to McDonald's. Now, if you go to the drive-thru McDonald's hasn't changed that much in 60 years. You still go around, you talk into a speaker, you drive to the window, you pay, you drive to the next window, you get your food, and you get to go home. What has changed, though, is when you go in. And when it comes to a lot of older couples, or just older people in general, if they're going to go to McDonald's, they usually like to go in and sit down. It's an older person thing, I guess. But when they go in, what do they find? If you walk up to the counter in McDonald's now, they will not take your order. They won't. As a matter of fact, they will downright refuse to do so. I'm not even sure if they have the capability anymore. I'm sure that they do, but most of the time they'll refuse to do it, and instead they will point you at an automated kiosk. You'll walk up to the screen, it's a touch screen, you'll be able to simply navigate the menus to pick out the thing that you want, you'll add it to a list, you'll submit the list, you'll pay there at the kiosk, and then you'll wait for your number to be called, they call your number, you pick up your food. Now, for those of us who have grown up in this age of transition, which I am a millennial, I absolutely grew up in the age of transition. I think it's funny because I can talk to people younger than me and say, do you remember house phones? Because I remember house phones. I grew up with a house phone. But a lot of people that are older than me, they don't have the patience for this, they don't have the tolerance for it, and they don't want it. But unfortunately, this is where things are going. So if you're going to go to, say, work at a McDonald's, well, the front counter job no longer exists. There's a manager still who will handle the front counter if somebody comes up, but the front counter staff, they don't exist anymore. That leaves the kitchen staff and the drive-thru staff. And the kitchen staff is also being replaced now. There is at least one that I know of, fully automated McDonald's. That is to say, there is no kitchen staff. There is no front front counter staff. I don't even know if there's a drive-thru staff because I don't really know how it works. But everything on the menu is capable of being built by the machine in the kitchen. And I've seen pictures of it. It's not even that complicated of a machine. It's an arm with a spatula. It's dispensers filled with food. You want a slice of cheese? You move the patty under, it drops a slice of cheese. It moves down, it gets a squirt of ketchup. It moves down, it gets a sprinkle of onions. It moves down, it gets a pickle. It moves down, it gets slid onto a bun. Bun on top, drop it onto a piece of paper, fold the paper up, done. kitchen staff, gone. So if you're going to tell these office and administrative people to go flip burgers, well, guess what? The burger jobs are gone. Maybe you tell them to become a waitress. Guess what? A lot of the waitress jobs are gone. These jobs are just gone. Unlike the horse farmer who thinks that they can move into a new job, the job no longer exists. Even when we come down here to, where was it? Production, that's like manufacturing and stuff. Food preparation and service. Where was agriculture? Ah, here we go. Farming, fishing, and forestry. We're talking about a 28% drop. Now remember, we said that 25 is the average. But notice how many of these are above the average. Farming, fishing, and forestry, replacement by AI, 28% of all jobs in the agricultural industries, gone. There is no other job to move into. And this is what I was talking about when I said the biggest problem that we're facing with AI. It's not going to be AI wiping out humanity. As a matter of fact, if AI were to wipe out all of humanity, well, then we wouldn't be talking about this right now. It wouldn't be important, because there wouldn't be any humans left. Instead, we are left in a situation where we are going to have 81 million people who are unemployed and unemployable. See, that's the funny thing they talk about when they talk about unemployment statistics. When they talk unemployment statistics, one of the things that they never talk about, but they differentiate by, is the unemployment statistics only actually apply to people who are actively looking for work, but cannot find work. The unemployment statistics do not apply to those who are not seeking work. Homeless people do not show up in the unemployment statistics. Disabled people do not show up in the unemployment statistics. These people are not necessarily looking for work, and thus they don't count. Which means that every single unemployment statistic that you have ever heard in your life is a lie. It is much, much higher. And the unemployment statistics that we're talking about right now, which they're saying is somewhere like, didn't they say it's like 6 to 8%? Something like that? If somebody in the chat can fact check me on that one, I'd appreciate it. But I think they said it was like 6 to 8% unemployment. It's probably closer to double that. It's probably somewhere like 12, 14, maybe 16% if I had to guess. And that's what we're at currently. Add another 81 million people to it. And what is that going to do to the economy? What is that going to do to the culture in general? What will that do to the nation? This is a crisis that we are going to be struck with very, very soon. All of those writers in Hollywood who are complaining right now that they're worried about AI coming in and replacing writers, well, they should be scared. Because it is coming. It's already here. People are already doing it. And those writers who are on strike right now, the fact that Bill Maher, the late night talk show host, talking head person, came back to work and said, look, you guys are out of work. The rest of us still have a job. Shows you exactly where we are going to be going in the near future. The more AI takes over, the more people are going to be out of a job. And there's not going to be a solution for it. Because it doesn't matter how much you strike, your job is gone. There is nothing for you to come back to now. It doesn't matter who is in solidarity with you, because the job is gone. And they now have to make sure that they keep their own job for as long as they can before they get replaced. We are looking at a future where we have massive swaths of people who are unemployed and unemployable. And what do we do with them? Because I want you to think about something. When COVID hit, and I'm talking about the very, very early days when COVID hit, when primarily it was only really affecting the elderly, because the elderly were vulnerable to it. And we were trying to suss out how lethal is COVID. And they looked at the only casualty reports they had, which was the elderly, and they saw that upwards of 10% of people over the age of 60 were dying from COVID. They said, my God, if this is a disease with a 10% mortality rate, we're doomed. Think about it. 10% of the United States would be 32 million people. How do we bury, where do we bury 32 million bodies? Even if you were to cremate them, how long would it take you to cremate 32 million bodies? New York City famously had containers filled with the dead, because the hospitals, the morgues, and the mortuaries were overflowing because New York had such a high population, and they simply could not, or they had such a high population density. Let me clarify that. And they could not handle the number of people that were dying with COVID. We couldn't handle that. And as it turns out, the death rate for COVID was less than 1%. We could not handle that. How are we supposed to handle this? And JP says, doomed. The answer to that is maybe. I mean, I'm not trying to be black pill here, but this is something that we will have to deal with. It's a bit like your house being on fire. You can ignore your house being on fire if you want. You can ignore it to your own peril. But sooner or later, you're going to have to deal with it, whether you want to or not. It's not necessarily a white pill or a black pill. It's an inevitable. That's inevitable and pill. It's inevitable. I'm putting that on a t-shirt. I like that. I amuse myself sometimes. So, this is something we're going to have to struggle with. Now, some people have suggested different things. Some people suggested this is the prime time to institute UBI, that is, Universal Basic Income. In other words, every single person receives, or every single citizen, not person. I'm sure that California would disagree, but every single citizen would receive a stipend from the government. And that would be your basis to live off of. We're talking basically the equivalent of like disability, but instead of just for the disabled, for everybody. It would essentially replace disability, actually. So that is potentially an option. It's not necessarily a very good option, but it's an option. I was listening to Tim Pool yesterday, I believe it was, maybe the day before, and he suggested that the economy may shift into something he calls an investment economy. Tim Pool's explanation was we moved from being a production economy, where you would go to work, build a thing, get paid for it, and go home, to a service economy, where you would go to work, do a thing for somebody, and then get paid, to an information economy, where you would get paid for doing things that, just required you to sit and share ideas, much like I'm doing now. By the way, I have a Patreon, so if you think that the information economy is good, You can participate in it. But he thinks that we may be heading into something he calls an investment economy, where instead of working a job, you would take any money that you had, maybe you get like a starter fund from the government or something like that, and you would invest it into companies, much like the stock market, and you would live, objectively, off of your monthly dividends. And so instead of going to work for Uber, and by the way, Uber is another one of those businesses that is automating itself. They are getting rid of human drivers, and they are investing heavily into automatically driving cars. So now when you call an Uber, you might get a driverless car. But perhaps you invest your money into Uber, and if Uber stock goes up during the month, then your monthly dividend goes up. However, this does have the unfortunate side effect of now consolidating even further all of the economic resources into the hands of an ever-shrinking number of corporations. But that may be something that it does. Either way, though, something is going to have to change, because as AI takes over, the way the market currently stands, the way modern economics currently work, is unsustainable. At least for us. The AI, having almost no requirements save electricity, will be able to do all of these jobs, and humans who need food and shelter will just simply be gone. This is something we were going to have to deal with very soon. It's already happening, and it's not going to get better. But we will get into that shortly, because since we're talking about humanity and death, let's talk about death. I'm going to grab a drink real quick. Ah, tasty, tasty water. Why do we have doggos on here? I don't know. I was going to refresh this. There we go. That'll make something more appropriate, I assume. Alright, so let's talk about death. Because this is from back in March. This is from some futurist who's talking about immortality, attainable by 2030. There was somebody who made a quote, and I don't remember who it was, but there was somebody who said that the current generation, Gen Z I think it is, will be the last generation to know death. Now, I'm not entirely certain that I agree with it. I do think that it may be the last generation to know death as an inevitability. After all, the famous quote by, I think it was Benjamin Franklin, the only inevitabilities in life are death and taxes. Death might be off of that list now. And the reason why is because the way science and medicine have been advancing, we are almost to the point where we are capable of simply overcoming the various different facets of death. That is to say, there are multiple different approaches to this. The first of which is possibly the most complicated of which, and that is simply aging. When we talk about aging, we're talking about the fact that we as humans, once we pass the age of like 25, 27, something like that, we pass the peak of our life, and at that point, everything literally goes downhill. That's not just an expression, it's a biological truth, because we then start to develop the symptoms of aging. That is to say, stamina begins to go down, endurance begins to go down, energy levels begin to drop. Things start wearing out. You notice all those little aches and pains and different things here and there. We age, we deteriorate over time. And the reasons why this happens is still not fully understood, but we're learning. The largest, or I guess the best guess right now by many geneticists when they talk about aging would be chromosomal telomeres. Which is to say, we're all familiar with kind of the X-shaped chromosome that we've seen in pictures. Telomeres are little caps on the ends of those chromosomes that carry extra genetic information. And that extra genetic information helps kind of keep everything in line. However, those telomeres are a bit like the meat on your brake pads. They are there to be worn away over time and protect the genetic code. And once they wear out, well, the wear and tear doesn't stop. And so now the wear and tear is affecting your genetic code as it is. That causes errors in replication, it causes things to not function right, it causes aging in general. So the obvious answer here is, what if we could start repairing those telomeres? Could we then halt the aging process? The answer to that is, we don't know. We're still working on it. However, there is some genetic research in mice that does look very promising. It's not very advanced yet. We're far away from human trials. However, remember that we like to discuss the future here. We like to discuss philosophies and ideas. And so as an idea, let's just go ahead and explore this as if it actually worked. What if these telomere treatments could actually halt the aging process? Meaning that you could grow up to be your prime self, and then we could, with the use of these treatments, stop you from aging any further. After all, telomeres don't stop you from growing. You still grow from a baby all the way into an adult. They would simply stop you from growing old. So think Aragorn from The Lord of the Rings. Specifically that time in, the Two Towers? When he's talking to a woman and reveals that he's 125 or something years old, even though he looks 35. That could be the future if we were to actually succeed with all of these genetic treatments. By simply stopping the aging process, you could live possibly forever. Of course, that's only one aspect of aging. There is still mental degradation that we do not understand yet. All old people, if they live long enough, seem to develop some form of dementia. It's not really necessarily a matter of if, but when. And we don't understand why. But if we could, if we understood why and we could treat it, now we're looking at possibly being able to live forever at the prime of your life and live clear-headed for as long as you wanted to. This is within the realm of our possibilities within the next 100 years. And I say 100 years because it's a really nice round number. However, it could easily be less than that. And so with this treatment, we would now have an entire class of people who would be functionally immortal. Which is to say, the rich and the powerful will be immortal. You will not be. And this will bring us into a very interesting position because now we will have an entire group of people who will literally be different from the rest of humanity. Again, when we look back to the difference between the Neanderthal and the Homo sapien, we know what happened there. What happens when we now have an entire group of people who are possibly genetically different from the rest of humanity, and immortal to boot because of it? It's a good question. But what if we can't do that? What if we can't do that? What if we never figure out the whole genetic aspect of this and we cannot affect telomeres or make people immortal that way? Well, what else do we got? Well, we are also still working on transplantation and bionics. I believe there was a story a while ago where somebody got like a pig kidney installed and it functioned for a couple of weeks. The reason they did that is because pig organs tend to be the most similar to human organs. However, we are also working on 3D printing. 3D printing has become very popular in the last few years. Maybe longer than that, actually. And we are getting into the realm where we can start printing tissues. We already have 3D printers who can print skin. This is not new. We have been printing skin for things like skin grafts for well over 2 years now. With a simple sample of somebody's DNA, so we know what markers to put in the skin, we can print a sheet of epithelial cells, and we can graft it to the person, and as long as, you know, all the different factors are in place, we can get capillaries to attach to these sheets of epithelial cells and turn these sheets of cells into living tissue, instead of having to harvest it from somewhere else in the body to move it. We are doing this right now. So how much longer is it going to be until we can print a lung? Until we can print a heart, or a liver, or a kidney? How much longer until we can print bones? After all, we can print just about everything else, or every other kind of material. Why can we not print the osteoblasts that make up bone? We are reaching that point. So, if you are an aging person, let's say that you're a politician somewhere and you have a bad heart. Normally, that would require you to get a heart transplant, waiting on a list until a donor shows up. Or there are some prosthetics that work okay, but what if we could take a sample of your DNA and simply print a new heart? And much like having an old car that you replace one piece at a time as they go bad and you can keep it running forever, we could do the same thing with people. Simply print their organs and replace them as they go bad. Which would lead into a couple of very frightening scenarios. First off, they made a whole movie kind of about that. I think it was called The Island. They didn't print things there, they actually raised clones for harvest. I think it was The Island, I could be wrong. But same concept. Famous or rich or just elite people who wanted to live forever, and this is how they do it. Or I think Family Guy made a joke, it was at Joan Rivers' expense, where she was interviewing some celebrity and she said, well, I would throw myself at you. Unfortunately, no part of my body is over 16 years old. But we could literally, it was funny in Family Guy, but we could literally have people like that where their organs just keep getting replaced every time they need a new one. And so, much like an old car, they keep restoring themselves back to mint condition. Now, this does not fix the brain issue, but from a purely biological standpoint, this person could theoretically live forever. And when we're talking about, you know, people in Congress, that means that your congressperson could potentially live forever. For better or worse. Probably worse. Definitely worse. Yeah, in fact, it would always be worse. But even if we couldn't do that, we are still working on bionics. Mostly when we talk about bionics, we talk in the realm of limbs. Bionic arms, bionic legs, things like that. And they are getting very, very good. I've seen some very impressive bionics in the last few years. I mean, we still have a lot of people that are running on the old tension models, where there is a system of bands and cables and everything, and all they have is like the little hook hand, where they can use it as a hook to pick something up, or it like splits into a grabber. There's lots of those that are still around, and those will probably be around for a long time now. But we are getting actual bionics. Much like they can put a cap on your head to read your thoughts through electrical signals, they can put patches on your arm to read the nerve signals going through your arm. And so if you lost your arm at the elbow, they could simply plug this bionic arm to your elbow, put the patches where the primary motor neurons are, and with the appropriate computer program, learn to read those along with a little retraining by the person getting the bionics, and they can now have a mostly, because it's not perfect yet, but a mostly functional bionic arm. We have this now. And we already have other prosthetic organs, like we have prosthetic hearts. I think it was Dick Cheney. I'm pretty sure it was Dick Cheney of the Bush administration who was regarded as the politician who had no heart. Because he didn't even have necessarily a prosthetic heart. What he had was a simple pump that was in his chest. So all it did was constantly push blood through it. It didn't beat, it just pumped. And it just ran blood through his lungs, back through the pump, and then out his other arteries. And so he had no pulse. He had no heartbeat. He just had one constantly circulating system. We have that now. Why could we not have other or better bionic hearts? Why could we not have different kind of bionic lungs? They don't necessarily have to act like lungs. All they have to do is draw in air and then push out air. And then have some kind of interface to pass oxygen to the blood. We're currently working on those kind of things right now. And we already have them to some degree. We have heart and lung bypass machines. If we were to figure out a way to miniaturize a heart and lung bypass machine and put that into somebody's rib cage, well, there you go. Now we just need to have different kind of bionic filters for the liver and kidneys. Some kind of chemical processor unit for a bionic stomach. The one that I'm actually most excited about, we need to have better nerve interfaces so that we can do bionic eyes, because I desperately need to set up bionic eyes. And we already have cochlear implants that are almost as good as real hearing. It's not perfect, but for the fact that we have it now is enough. Bionic immortality is something that we are well within maybe 50 years of, maybe 75 years. This is going to be possible. But since we started talking about AI, what if we just talk about the human mind? Maybe we can't get the whole genetic thing worked out, and maybe bionics don't seem to do the job. What if we could simply copy somebody's brain? After all, I think I read somewhere that the brain is only like 25 petabytes worth of information, meaning that we currently have computer systems capable of holding the entire thought collection of a human mind. I mean, we already have that much storage. We've had that much storage for a long time. I mean, 25 petabytes is perhaps... There are people who probably have that in their homes now. Governments and research centers have had that kind of storage for a long time. But what if your body was failing? What if you weren't ready to go yet? What if we could transfer either your brain itself or perhaps just your thought processes into a computer system? And by doing that, you now get to live forever. So if we can transfer your brain into something else, okay? So it's still your brain. It's still absolutely you. And now that you are inside of a brain case, something like, say, out of Ghost in the Shell, and you have the ability to connect to visual monitors so you can see, hearing monitors so you can hear, microphones. If you have the ability to speak, to even wirelessly connect with other systems, if we could give you a robot. Doesn't necessarily have to be an android type body, but just a robot with a manipulator and the ability to move. Could you not live forever like this? This is a form of immortality. So long as your brain remains alive, you're here. And if your brain can be kept alive forever, then you live forever. I bring this up because it doesn't really matter which way we go with it, whether it's genetic, bionic, whether it is printed organs, or brain transplant. Human immortality is coming. It's not as far off or as science fiction as anybody wants you to believe. There are actually some conspiracy theorists who think that we have it now, and we've had it for a long time. I don't put too much stock in those, but at the same time, if they were to bring me proof of it, I would not be that surprised. I really wouldn't be. Immortality is a thing that is coming. And when it comes, the question is, number one, who's going to get it? Which obviously is going to be the rich and famous at first, and the powerful, the wealthy. But if it's common enough, can just upper class get it? Maybe the upper middle class. In fact, if it's common enough, can anybody get it? Anybody who is at least of decent means. If you can afford a house, maybe you can afford immortality. And so what do we do with that information? Obviously, anybody who had the option of living longer would probably take it. But that does lead into a bigger problem. See, we've already discussed in the previous part, or the previous segment on AI, that with the rise of AI within the next 10 to 20 years, we're going to see potentially 81 million people in the US alone unemployed and unemployable. That means that we're going to have a whole bunch of people who, how are we going to house them? How are we going to feed them? How are we going to take care of them in general? Now tack on immortality. Humanity's conquering of death, not only removing ourselves from evolution, but removing ourselves from the cycle of life entirely. How does that factor in? So I want to talk about something that's been very common in the news lately. And that is this. We're gonna pop over to Wikipedia for a minute. I want to talk human overpopulation. Now, human overpopulation is something that has been discussed to great length by a myriad of different organizations and talking heads. I am just the next in a very, very long line there, which kind of describes my whole life. Either way, though, human population. If we take a look at some of the key arguments about overpopulation, we talk about things like overconsumption. So this is the Worldwide Fund for Nature, the Global Footprint Network, different places like that say that the Earth can only support so much. And to a certain extent, they're right. The Earth can only support so much. Now, what the Earth can actually support is currently unknown. Because for the billions of people that are on the Earth right now, the actual coverage of humanity on the Earth is very, very small. It's kind of like looking at the population of the United States that I showed a while back. And I don't have that pulled up right now, but I showed that most people in the US live in the big cities. That is why the Electoral College was so important. Because if it was not for the Electoral College, then the 5% of the country, which is concentrated in all those big cities, or it's like 85% of the country, something like that. The overwhelming majority of the country that was in all those major cities would override the rest of the country, which took up like 95% of the geographical area. There is so much room on the planet that could be used to different ways, and it's not being used. So to say that we're over-consuming on the planet is simply wrong. Now, it's not to say that it's not impossible. It is possible to over-consume on a planet. We're just not there yet. I don't think we're anywhere near it. But that's one argument. And there's carrying capacity, which falls, kind of into the same thing as overconsumption, because if you exceed the carrying capacity of a system, then your population's going to die. So this is a 2004 meta-analysis of 69 such studies predicted the maximum number of people the Earth would ever have would be 7.7 billion. With lower and upper meta bounds of 0.65 and 98 billion people respectively. Now see, that 98 billion sounds a lot better, if you ask me. After all, we do still have a lot of room with which we could expand, but that would require actually expanding. That would require doing things like figuring out floating cities. How do you build a population in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, the Atlantic or Pacific Ocean? How do we populate the poles? How do we populate the Saharan desert? There are challenges to these things, but that doesn't mean that they're not impossible, and it does not mean that necessarily these are the ceilings. Point is, people are worried about overpopulation, and with AI coming in and human immortality both around the corner, if you've already heard the overpopulation argument and you're already tired of it now, it is about to get so much worse. And so, this is one of the reasons why I want to talk about this, because not only are you going to hear more and more about the human overpopulation thing, but I'm going to go back to something that we talked about just a couple of weeks ago, and that is the degrowth movement. Now, we talked about this before. We discussed exactly what it is and how it works, and why certain groups want it so badly. But to make it very short, down here, they probably give a definition that I'm going to disagree with. Let's see, they say the main argument of degrowth theory is that an infinite expansion of the economy is fundamentally contradictory to the finiteness of material resources on Earth, and even though capitalist development may create technologies which decrease human dependency on fossil fuel, even though capitalist development may create technologies which decrease human dependency on fossil fuels and material resources. That is a very complicated way of saying that it doesn't matter what technology we develop. It does not matter what culture we develop. There is a finite amount of space and resources on the planet, and we have to cut our population back to meet that. Now, the reason why I want to talk about this, because this has been in a lot of different places. They're calling it degrowth now. They've called it population control before. and in previous times they would just simply call it culling. But we talked about this at great length a couple of weeks ago, where I discussed it, and I explained that the degrowth movement cloaks itself in this environmentalist glow where they talk about human overpopulation. They talk about the unsustainability of human civilization. They say that our reliance on fossil fuels is going to cause an energy crisis when the fossil fuels eventually run out. Which, by the way, is something that they have been warning us about since I was in elementary school, which was 30 years ago. They told us that we would run out of gasoline in the 90s. They told us that we would run out of oil in the 2000s. And they're still saying that in 5 years, we're going to run out of fuel oil. Okay, they're liars. It's not going to happen. But it's a really, really good way to get your discussion in the door so that you can get people talking about it and potentially even pass laws and regulations that help you get it through. The reason why I want to talk about degrowth, though, is because the entire conversation about AI is leading into the discussion of degrowth. When it comes to immortality, it is leading into the conversation on degrowth. After all, if there are 100 million jobs, okay? If there's 100 million jobs in an area, and we have 100 million people who are doing those jobs, if we now bring in an artificial intelligence that is capable of doing 50 million jobs, then suddenly we now have 50 million too many people here. There are not enough sustainable jobs, and thus we can only support half of the population. And so you can see how the rise of AI kind of dovetails in with this whole degrowth movement. Now, does that mean that AI is bad? No. Which is why I preface this entire conversation at the very beginning with this idea that we're going to discuss AI and immortality, and these things are going to be tools. They're not going to be good, they're not going to be bad, they are simply going to be tools. Tools for us to use to create, hopefully, possibly to destroy. But either way, tools alone. Instead, what we have now is this degrowth movement who is going to try and use the tool to their own advantage to say that we need to start getting rid of entire populations of people because they're simply extraneous. We don't need them anymore. They're a burden on society. They're extra. They don't contribute. They need to be gotten rid of. All things that we have heard in the past. And we're going to get to that. But they all say that we need, more renewable power. They all say that we need to have more renewable systems. They say that we need to have less people in general, and now AI is going to give them the tools to do just that. The same thing, of course, is true of immortality, because, well, immortality will lead to an overpopulation crisis. It may take years, it may take decades, but if we can stop people from dying in general, well, we're going to have an overpopulation problem. Especially if immortality comes with the advantages of, if we go with things like genetic repairs, keeping you at the prime of your life. Who would not want to stay at the prime of their life for that long? I would. I'd do it. So human overpopulation will become a thing if we conquer death, and so that gives the degrowth movement even more ammunition. The problem is this, however. As I discussed before, degrowth is just a communist Trojan horse. The entire degrowth movement is all about shrinking the population to a much more manageable size. Which is where I want to get into this. See, I told you at the beginning of this that the human race is going to be coming to an existential crisis. Primarily, whether we exist or don't. And that, of course, has opened the doors to a lot of different kinds of revolutionary thought. We have some people who think that we're going into a transhumanist revolution, where we are going to evolve with the help of technology beyond Homo sapien, and we're going to become something greater. Something half human, half technological. Something stronger, faster, smarter than we have ever been before. And if that's the case, sign me up. I'm on board for that. I've always been somewhat of a transhumanist. I think it's great. Anything that makes us better, I'm on board for. On the flip side of that coin, however, you do have these people. You have the communists. And I thought it was actually very interesting because when we talk about communism and how far back it goes and all the different things that it's done, I wanted to look up communist revolutions because communism always comes in the form of a revolution. People don't just vote for communism. They never do. No, communism always has to topple that which stood before it and use the rubble of what they have felled as the foundation for their new regime. And so there's even a whole list here. Communist revolutions and coups throughout history. The successful ones, going all the way back to 1917, and the unsuccessful ones, going all the way back to 1915. There is a long, long list of communist revolutions, and you'll notice that there's a few that were successful. There's more that were not. Right now, we as humanity stand not at the crossroads, but the crossroads are in sight. Now, as I stated with the degrowth movement, and I don't have my visual aid here, so you'll just have to either go back to the previous video we did that in, or just remember it. But as I explained, if you have an area that has 10 districts in it, 10 economic districts in it, and all of them are doing as good as they can, you can tax people, and your government can all live very wealthy off of those taxes, even if they have to divide it up 1,000 ways for all the bureaucracy that's involved in it. However, if you can shrink your population to something that is much more manageable so that you no longer need a 1,000 person bureaucracy, but you only need a 10 or a 100 person system of lords to help manage it, well, you can increase your wealth even with a lower population base and a poorer population base just by keeping the population down and taking everything you can from them. That's kind of the basis of the whole communist revolution. After all, every revolutionary, once they topple everything and they think they're going to be on top, they think they're going to be incredibly wealthy, they think they're going to live in luxury. They might not admit it, but they all think that. So imagine this. Now that we have artificial intelligence and we have immortality on the table, not only can you, as a communist revolutionary, look to overturn a system and put yourself on top of it with all the power and luxury that comes with it, but imagine that you're a communist revolutionary. And also imagine that now, not only do you have to not share power with an entire bureaucracy, but with the power of AI, you no longer even need a retinue of people to help you enforce control over a smaller population. With the power of AI at your disposal, you could have mass surveillance, you could have robot soldiers. You could have a lot of things. And so you alone could have your own technocratic communist utopia. See, JP? I told you we were going to get back there. You could create your own utopia with the aid of AI and just a small enough population for you to control with it. In addition, with the advances of immortality, you could enjoy an extended life, or you could enjoy an infinite life, where you never have to worry about having to abdicate your position. You might never even have to worry about being dethroned, unless, another communist revolution shows up. So these tools that we're working on right now could easily be used by communist revolutionaries to create a brand new world that they think is going to be better. Well, it will be better for them. And this is why I think that we need to worry about the advances of AI and the advances of immortality medicine, because there are people who are going to want to abuse it and weaponize it. As I said when I first started this, a hammer can be used to build a house or crack a skull. And if you think that was original, no, I got that from Castlevania. But it's very important here. It's a tool. And there are people out there who will want to use this as a weapon. They will want to, and they will use it given the chance. And that is something that we have to watch out for. See, I was having a discussion the other day with somebody, and we were talking about this, and they said, that AI and immortality are going to be existential crises. And it's probably going to be the end of humanity. I said, yeah, it could be. There is also great potential here. Because think about this. With AI, if AI can take over most of all manual labor jobs, or all manual labor jobs, where does that leave humanity? Well, that leaves humanity to exercise what humanity has always been the greatest at doing. After all, what was it that made a monkey pick up a stick, pick up a vine, pick up a rock, and tie the rock to the end of the stick with a vine? Marmosets didn't do that. Okay? Capybaras didn't do that. Octopus didn't do that. All the smartest animals in the world, dolphins, elephants, none of them have been able to do this. What was it that made primordial humans pick up a rock, a stick, and a vine and turn that into a club? Creativity. We are not just the thinking ape. We are the creative ape. We are the imaginative ape. We are the species that can not just picture something abstract, but we can turn the abstract into reality. Every single artist, every single musician, every single performer has been the expression of this creativity that we have been cultivating for the last 20,000 years. Or however long it's been that, humanity's been out here. I don't know. I'm not good at history. So once we have AI that takes over all manual tasks, what do we have left? Well, we have our creativity. Not just what are we doing now, but what can we do? Because we already have the ability to do the things that we want. We'll have the ability to solve the mysteries of the universe. Because once we have an AGI, we will be able to make better AGIs. We'll be able to make artificial intelligence that is so far and above humanity in intelligence that by working in tandem with AI, we will be able to think it, and AI will be able to create it. That has so much potential, because then not only will we have all of our basic needs met, we will have food, we will have shelter, we will overpopulate the Earth, but we will be able to move, we'll be able to go to orbit, into orbiting space stations, maybe even rings. The Earth could have ring habitats. We could go to the moon, and by pulling things like oxygen out of lunar dust, be able to have replenishing oxygen there. We could have hydroponics or aeroponics, either way. We could set up entire colonies on the moon. We could go to Venus. We could go to Mars. More importantly, we could get out of our solar system. By having artificial intelligence smart enough to help us build spacecraft, by having thinking machines capable of going into space and mining asteroids, by having people who are immortal, who could actually captain a ship all the way from here to Alpha Centauri. These things are tools that we could be used to help get humanity off of this cradle that we call Earth and finally step out into the rest of the universe. It's a tool. We can use it to build. But we can only do that if we can stop people from using it as a weapon first. And that is why this is an existential crisis. Most people have heard the term existential crisis before. Most of the time they'll hear it as like a midlife crisis or something like that. When they say, well, who am I? What have I done with my life? But I'm talking about an actual existential crisis, as in it is a crisis of our existence. Does humanity survive and evolve to become something greater? Or do we use this to destroy ourselves? There are people who will use this to destroy us. They absolutely exist. They exist right now. They will exist in the future. They will always exist. Our job is to not let them succeed. And so every single time you hear somebody talking about like the degrowth movement, or if they talk about the need for population reduction because of the climate and everything, I need you to realize that these people are the ones who, given the chance, if they were given the capability of, say, immortality, they would make themselves immortal so that they could take away life from other people. If they were given the power of AI, they would use it to manage the population of other people because they have a goal, they have an agenda. And we have to stand against them. And the first part of standing against them is knowing who they are and what they're trying to do, which is what I have done here today. Before I let you go, I actually did hear something absolutely brilliant. And this is one of those things that's going to stick with me for a long, long time. I heard it from the, I forget the name of the channel, but I heard it from somebody named James Lindsay. And he was quoting somebody else. I couldn't tell you who it was, but he says this. He said it very simply. He said, communists share our vocabulary, but not our dictionary. And it's a beautifully simple statement because it's true. They do share our vocabulary. We can say the same things. However, what we mean and what they mean are not the same. A great example is equality. When we say equality, most of us in general mean equal opportunity for every human being, regardless of your gender, regardless of your race, regardless of your religion, regardless of anything. Equal opportunities for everybody. When communists say they want equality, they generally mean equity, though, which is to say they want equal outcomes for everybody. The same word, but two different definitions. And so when we look at something like degrowth, well, when we look at it, we would say that degrowth is probably a bad thing. After all, don't we want to be growing? Don't we want to be prospering? Don't we want to be expanding? The answer to these things is yes. But when they say degrowth, what they mean is population, subjugation, control. Know your enemy and know what they're doing, because only by knowing can you then do something to stop it. And so I hope I've given you something today to think about, and I hope I've given you the ammunition that you need to push back whenever you hear this. And so that's where I'm going to go ahead and let this go. It's 10 minutes to the 2-hour mark, so pretty good time. And I think I covered this rather well. Someday when I get a larger channel, I'll be able to do like questions and answers at the end of this. Or maybe one day when I get super chats enabled. I don't know. We'll see. But for now, I'm just going to have to leave this as it is. And if you want to discuss it further, we can do that on my Discord server. So if you're enjoying this, subscribe to the channel. Make sure you hit the bell icon. That way you get notified when these come out. And join us on the Discord server so we can discuss things like that there. Because I'm always up for a good debate. It's always good. If you know somebody else, however, who might enjoy this, I mentioned this at the beginning of the lecture, but I'll mention it again now. Share this video with them. There might be something in there for them to use. Who knows? Otherwise, though, for me, if you like me, leave a like on the video. Leave comments down below, because the comments help and they make my day better. If you are normally here on the Sunday streams for the tabletop games, we are starting a new module. We are doing Warhammer 40,000. I thought we were doing Digimon, but Digimon lost. So, it's fine. It'll wait for another day. Now I just gotta hope that I'm up to doing something of this scale, because 40k is gonna be huge. Anyway, though, I'm gonna let that go. So, thank you for coming to this lecture of mine. I hope you got something out of it. I will see you next Saturday for something. I don't know what yet, but I should see you there. And yeah, have a good day. And until the next time, take care.